The lawyer cleared his throat the way people do when they're about to say something that will permanently alter the air in the room. I remember thinking how strange it was that such a small sound could feel heavier than the silence that came before it. We were sitting in my parents' living room, the same one where my sister and I had opened Christmas presents every year, where birthdays had been celebrated, where arguments had been swallowed by forced smiles and polite dinners. The couch still had the faint floral scent of my mother's perfume. My father's watch rested on the side table, placed there so deliberately it felt staged. My sister, Claire, sat across from me, her legs crossed, her posture perfect. She had always known how to look composed, even when she was nervous, especially when she was nervous. I sat stiffly in the armchair, hands folded, back straight. I had learned long ago that showing too much emotion in this family was a mistake. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the papers. "As you both know," he began, "your parents left very specific instructions regarding the distribution of their estate." Claire nodded, already bracing herself for confirmation of what she clearly expected. I didn't nod. I just stared at the carpet, tracing the pattern with my eyes, waiting. "Your parents asked me to read this sentence verbatim," the lawyer continued. "Their words, not mine." He paused. Then he read, "We want it to be known that in life and in legacy, we chose Claire." The sentence hit the room like a dropped plate. Claire inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her mouth, not in shock, but in something closer to overwhelmed validation. Tears welled in her eyes immediately, the kind of tears that come when you feel chosen, affirmed, seen. My chest tightened, but my face stayed still. The lawyer continued, explaining assets, properties, accounts. Nearly everything, house, savings, investments, was being transferred to Claire. I received a modest sum, enough to be polite, enough to say they hadn't left me with nothing, but not enough to pretend it was fair. When the reading ended, the lawyer gathered his papers, gave us both a look that mixed sympathy and professional detachment, and excused himself. The front door clicked shut. Silence. Claire finally looked at me. I didn't know they were going to say it like that," she said softly. I nodded once. "Of course you didn't." She frowned. "That's not what I meant." "I know," I said. And I did. She stood and crossed the room, placing a hand on my shoulder. "They loved you. You know that, right?" I looked up at her hand, then at her face. "They loved the idea of me. You they chose." She flinched. That's when I stood up. "I think I should tell you something," I said. Claire blinked. "Tell me what?" I walked toward the bookshelf, the old one my father had built himself decades ago. Everyone thought it was decorative now, just old books, dusty photo frames, forgotten trophies. I reached behind it, pulled. The panel shifted. Claire gasped. Behind the shelf was a recessed wall safe, small, matte black, invisible unless you knew exactly where to press. My sister stared at it, frozen. "What is that?" she whispered. I entered the code. The door opened with a soft mechanical click. Inside were documents, deeds, certificates, a sealed envelope, a flash drive. I turned back to her. "This," I said, "is what I secretly owned." Her face drained of color, and for the first time since the lawyer had read the will, I saw doubt replace certainty in her eyes. Earlier, 15 years before. I was 16 when I learned something about my parents that changed everything. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that feels invisible until you realize later that it split your life in two. I came home early from school. Headache, permission slip signed. The house was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. I heard voices from my father's study. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just froze when I heard my name. "She's responsible," my mother was saying. "More than Claire, always has been." My father sighed. "Responsibility isn't everything." "It should be," my mother snapped. "Claire needs freedom. She needs room to become herself." "And what about her?" my father asked quietly. There was a pause. Then my mother said something I have never forgotten. "She'll manage. She always does." I stood there, heart pounding, understanding something instinctively before my mind could form the words. Claire was the investment. I was the backup plan. That night, I didn't cry. I started planning. The first secret. My grandfather had died when I was 13. Officially, everything he owned passed to my father. Unofficially, that wasn't the whole truth. A month before his death, my grandfather had taken me for a drive. No destination, just quiet roads and time. "You're observant," he had said, "and patient." I didn't know what to say to that. "Those qualities," he continued, "matter more than people think." When we returned, he handed me a sealed envelope. "Don't open this until you're ready to understand it." I didn't open it for 3 years. When I finally did, it changed the trajectory of my life. Inside was a handwritten note and instructions, and the beginning of a secret no one else in my family knew existed. Back in the living room, Claire took a step closer to the safe. "Why didn't I know about this?" she asked. "Because you were chosen, and I was prepared." She shook her head slowly. "Prepared for what?" I met her eyes. "For this moment." Claire didn't touch the safe. She just stared at it, as if it might suddenly vanish if she blinked too hard. "You're saying," she began slowly, "that you've been hiding something in this house for how long?" "For most of my life," I said. Her laugh came out sharp and disbelieving. "That's not possible. Mom and Dad knew everything that happened in this house." I shook my head. "They thought they did." She turned away, pacing the room, dragging her fingers through her hair. The composure she had worn during the will reading was gone now, replaced by agitation. "This isn't funny," she said. "If this is some kind of joke, it's not." "Then explain," she snapped. "Explain why there's a hidden safe in our parents' house that only you know about." I leaned against the bookshelf, folding my arms. "Do you remember Grandpa?" I asked. She stopped pacing. "Of course I do." "Do you remember how he used to watch people instead of talking?" She hesitated. "I guess. I watched you," I said. "He listened to you. He admired your confidence, your ambition." Her chin lifted slightly, instinctively defensive. "But he studied me," I continued. "He tested me." Claire frowned. "Tested you how?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into the safe and pulled out the sealed envelope, the same one my grandfather had given me all those years ago. The paper had yellowed at the edges. The ink had faded just enough to remind me how old it was. "I was 13, I said quietly. "He gave me this a month before he died." Claire took a step closer. "What is it?" "A choice," I replied. "One you never knew existed." I opened the envelope again, even though I knew every word by heart. Inside was his letter. "If you are reading this, it means you have learned something about the world that others around you have not. You see what people value. You see what they ignore. That means you are ready." Claire swallowed. "What does it say?" she asked. I met her eyes. "It says he didn't trust our parents to be fair." Her breath caught. "That's not—" He knew exactly who they were and exactly who they would choose. The room felt smaller, heavier. "You're twisting things," she said weakly. "They loved us both." "They loved differently," I replied, and he knew that difference would grow. I pulled out the first document from the safe. A property deed. Claire's eyes scanned it quickly, then widened. "This is—" her voice faltered. "This is land." "Commercial land," I corrected, "on the edge of what used to be nothing." She flipped through the pages. "This location, this is near the industrial park." "Now," I said, "it wasn't when he bought it." Her face changed as understanding dawned. "He bought this decades ago," she whispered. "Yes." "And it's in your name?" "Yes." She looked up at me, stunned. "How much is it worth?" I hesitated. Say it, she insisted. Enough that the house doesn't matter. Enough that the will doesn't matter. She sank onto the couch. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she laughed, softly at first, then louder. So that's it. That's the big reveal. You're secretly rich. I didn't smile. That's not the whole of it. Her laughter faded. What do you mean? I pulled out another folder. Investment records. Her fingers trembled as she took them from me. These go back years. Before college? Before Mom and Dad ever stopped paying my tuition halfway through sophomore year? I asked. She winced. They said money was tight. I nodded. That's what they told me, too. I watched as she connected the dots, one by one. You didn't ask for help, she said slowly. No. You didn't tell anyone. No. And you just built this? She asked. Yes. How? I smiled faintly, carefully. The years they didn't see. I moved out at 19. Not dramatically, no shouting, no slammed doors, just a packed car and a polite goodbye. My parents hugged me tightly, proud of my independence. Claire hugged me longer, whispering that she'd miss me. Neither of them noticed that I didn't ask for help. I worked while I studied. Then I studied what others ignored. I learned zoning laws before I learned how to relax. I learned contracts before I learned how to trust. When my grandfather's land became valuable, I didn't sell it. I leveraged it. When the first opportunity came, an investor looking for quiet partners, I said yes. When the second came, I said nothing at all. By the time Claire graduated and came back home, glowing with ambition and praise, I was already gone from the family narrative. I was doing fine, which was another way of saying, we don't worry about her. Back in the living room, Claire looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. All those years, she said, you let us think. I let you think whatever you wanted. I never lied. She closed the folder and pressed it to her chest. You could have told me, she said. I studied her face. Did you ever notice that they stopped asking me what I wanted? She hesitated. Maybe. Did you ever wonder why? She swallowed. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. Not in the living room this time, but in the lawyer's office downtown. A place built for truth to be formal, contained, and irreversible. Claire arrived early. I knew that because she texted me twice before I even parked. Are you coming? Please tell me you're coming. When I walked in, she was sitting at the long conference table, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles are white. The confidence she'd worn all her life at school events, award ceremonies, family gatherings was gone. She looked smaller, human. The lawyer entered a moment later, followed by an older man I didn't recognize and a woman carrying a slim briefcase. Good, the lawyer said, nodding when he saw me. We're all here. Claire looked at the strangers. Who are they? The older man smiled politely. Independent trustee. The woman set her briefcase down. And legal counsel. Claire's gaze snapped to me. What is this? She asked. This, I said calmly, taking my seat, is what happens when assumptions meet documentation. The lawyer cleared his throat. After the will reading, I was contacted regarding materials that may affect the distribution of the estate. Claire swallowed. Materials? I reached into my bag and placed the flash drive on the table. This, I said, contains contracts my parents signed 15 years ago. The room went still. The lawyer picked up the flash drive carefully, as if it might burn him. These contracts, I continued, tie part of their estate to an investment vehicle my grandfather created. Claire shook her head. That doesn't make sense. Dad never mentioned. He wouldn't, because he didn't think it would matter. The trustee leaned forward. The agreements are clear, he said. They were contingent, and the contingency has now been met. Claire's voice trembled. What contingency? The lawyer met her eyes. Disclosure. I watched the words land. They were required, the lawyer explained gently, to disclose certain assets and arrangements in their final estate planning. They did not. Claire turned to me, stunned. You knew? Yes. And you said nothing? I waited, because timing matters. She laughed shakily. So what now? The lawyer inhaled. Now the will is partially invalidated. The silence that followed felt endless. Invalidated? Claire whispered. The primary distribution, not entirely null, but it must be restructured. Claire stared at the table. And how was it restructured? She asked. The trustee answered this time. Equitably. Her shoulders sagged. Equitable, not chosen. After the meeting. We didn't speak as we walked out of the building. The city hummed around us, cars, people, life moving forward as if nothing monumental had just happened. Finally, outside, Claire stopped. Was that your plan? She asked quietly. I turned to her. No. Then what was? To stop pretending, all of us. She looked down at the pavement. They really believed they were doing the right thing. I know, that's what makes it complicated. She laughed bitterly. I thought being chosen meant being loved more. I studied her face. Do you still? She hesitated. I don't know. We stood there for a moment longer. Then she asked, what happens to the house? We sell it, or keep it jointly, your choice. She looked surprised. Are you giving me a choice? Yes. She nodded slowly. I don't think I want it. Neither do I. She sighed. Funny how that works. Weeks later. The estate was settled quietly. No courtroom drama, no public spectacle, just signatures, recalculations, adjustments. In the end, the inheritance was split more evenly, not perfectly equal, but no longer a declaration of preference. Claire took time off work. I heard she traveled. I stayed where I was, continuing the life I'd built piece by piece in silence. One evening, she called me. I found something, she said. What? I asked. In Mom's desk, a journal. My chest tightened. What did it say? She paused. That she worried about you. I closed my eyes. She wrote that she was strong in ways she didn't understand, that she was afraid of holding you back. I exhaled slowly. That doesn't excuse anything, Claire added, quickly, but it explains something. Yes, I said, it does. Another pause. Do you hate me? She asked. The question was raw, vulnerable. No, I answered honestly, but I needed you to see me. I do now, she said. The last visit. We sold the house. On the final day, we walked through it together, room by room. The living room felt emptier without the furniture. The bookshelf stood bare, the hidden panel now visible if you knew where to look. Claire ran her fingers along the wall. You could have taken everything, she said softly. Yes. Why didn't you? I thought about my grandfather, about patience, about preparation. Because winning isn't the same as choosing, I said. She nodded. At the door, she stopped. I don't know what our relationship looks like after this, she said. Neither do I replied. But it'll be honest. She smiled faintly. That's new for us. What I really owned. People like to think ownership is about money, about property, accounts, assets. But what I really owned, the thing my parents never saw, the thing my sister never suspected, was autonomy. I owned my silence. I owned my timing. I owned the version of myself that didn't need approval to exist. When my parents said, we chose your sister, they thought they were closing a chapter. They didn't realize they were handing me the final page. And on that page, for the first time, I wrote my own name. I didn't expect the silence to be so loud. After the estate was settled, after the house was sold, after the papers were signed and the obligations dissolved, there was no dramatic relief, no cinematic release, just space. For most of my life, I had been reacting to expectations, to omissions, to decisions made without me in the room. Even my preparation had been a reaction, a long and quiet answer to a question no one had bothered to ask out loud. Now, there were no questions, only days. I learned quickly that freedom feels unsettling when you've earned it through restraint instead of rebellion. The first thing I did. I didn't buy anything extravagant. No house upgrade, no car, no celebration. Instead, I took a week off and went somewhere anonymous. No childhood memories, no family landmarks, no explanations required. A small coastal town, early mornings, long walks. On the third day, sitting alone at a cafe, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't know who I was when no one was underestimating me. That realization hurt more than the will reading ever had. Claire's call. It was nearly midnight when she called again, weeks later. "I think I owe you an apology," she said. I leaned back against the hotel balcony railing, listening to the waves below. "For what?" I asked. "For being chosen," she said quietly. "Being chosen." I closed my eyes. "I didn't ask to be chosen," she continued, "but I enjoyed how it felt, and I never questioned why you weren't." Her honesty landed differently now. There was no defense in her voice, no comparison. "I didn't resent you for it," I said. "I resented the silence around it." "I know. That's worse." We sat in that truth together for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you think they knew?" I thought about that longer than she probably expected. "I think," I said slowly, "they knew something was uneven, but they told themselves a story where that imbalance was kindness." She sighed. "That sounds like them." What I found in the files. Weeks later, while organizing old documents, I found something I hadn't expected: a copy of a letter my grandfather never sent. It was addressed to my parents. The ink was firm, decisive. "If you are reading this, it means I failed to say what I should have while I still could. One of your children will not need you the way you expect. Do not mistake that for indifference. Do not punish competence with neglect." I stared at the words for a long time. He had seen it all coming, and still he had trusted me to navigate it alone. For the first time, I felt the weight of that trust, not as in pressure, but as inheritance. The question everyone eventually asked. People found out, not about the flash drive or the contracts, but about the outcome. Family friends reached out. Old acquaintances suddenly remembered my number. The question was always the same, phrased differently. "Do you feel better now?" At first, I didn't know how to answer, because the truth was, I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned, and alignment is quieter than revenge. Claire and me. Our relationship didn't magically heal, but it changed. We stopped performing for each other. She no longer spoke as if success were a fragile thing that had to be defended. I no longer spoke as if independence required distance. One afternoon, months later, we met for coffee. She smiled and said, "You know what's strange?" "What?" I asked. "I don't feel chosen anymore." "And how does that feel?" She considered it. "Terrifying, but honest." I nodded. "That's how it starts." The thing I never told anyone. There was one last asset my grandfather had left me, not documented, not hidden: a habit. Whenever I'm about to make a major decision, I ask myself one question: who benefits from me staying quiet? If the answer isn't me, I speak. That habit changed everything. What my parents really left me. They didn't leave me validation, they didn't leave me reassurance, but they left me contrast. They showed me what conditional love looks like, and in doing so, taught me exactly what I would never replicate. In that way, even their failure became instructional. The final truth. People assume the story ends when justice is restored. It doesn't. It ends when identity stops being negotiated. I was never the unchosen one. I was the one no one thought needed choosing, and that misunderstanding gave me time, space, leverage. It gave me a life that didn't depend on permission. So when my parents said, "We chose your sister," they weren't wrong. They just didn't realize that choice had already freed me.